invite you to spend the next half hour with Sri Harold Klemp, the Mahanta, the Living Ek Master. As the spiritual leader of Ekankar, Sri Harold travels worldwide, giving out the teachings of the light and sound of God.
My talk title is What's It All About? There are basically three parts here, broken into three parts. The riddle of the question, and the second one is the gift of change. Had to think here because I'm in the front part of this thing, not in the middle. And the last is the riddle of God. Now these are all interesting things that underlie the overall question, what's it all about? Now the riddle of the question, I'd like to read something from the Ekankar Bible, the Shariyat Ki Sugmad, Book 2, and from chapter 1, which is the eternal dreamer of Ek. The riddle of the question is forever plaguing the neophyte, for he never understands that no question can be put without an answer. Yet all questions are on the mental level. But the answers are always available before the question. In other words, there are always the answers to the problems of life without the questions existing. It is the doubting in the mind of man which leads to questions. This doubt arises when there is a lack of confidence. What's it all about? The riddle of the question. There are all levels of questions. Sometimes I listen to this radio show, John Doremus. He plays a number of music selections, light music, sometimes vocals, sometimes instrumental. In between the selections, he puts little stories, sometimes very quiet humor, sometimes just little words to think on, just little points to ponder. And so one night he was bringing up this one little story. He said, a lot of people believe that the Austrians have no sense of humor. And he says, but it's not so. He said, for example, he'd like to give this as an illustration. The wife says to her husband, don't you think it's time to take our son to the zoo? The Austrian husband says, they'll come and get him if they want him bad enough. So, quiet humor. Another question came from an Ekist who has come to the States from another country. This is Bernard, who was a recent arrival who needed to find work in a hurry because he needed to eat and also find a place to stay. Now I know this situation quite well. I've been in it a number of times, and I'm sure many of you have too. Sometimes we put ourselves into it through a lack of planning, and sometimes it's the Holy Spirit's way to bring us some lessons about ourselves that we could not learn in another way. So Bernard goes to a warehouse. It's a mail order place. He's sent to the gift wrapping department. When he gets in the room, he finds 30 or 40 other people are in there, and they're all wrapping packages very carefully. And Bernard explained that when they're wrapping packages, when there's a delicate item, They have to go at it very carefully, use fine paper, and put it all in there and tape it very carefully. And so he was doing this, putting it all together. And then he was just curious, being the first day on the job, he looked over at a co-worker to see how he was doing the work. The co-worker slapped together the package, and he had it all wrapped up, mailing label on and everything. And he remembered he forgot to put the invoice into the box. Now he wasn't going to open up that box again. So Bernard said, this other worker just gave the box a sharp punch with his fist, caved it in, and then in the crack he was able to slip the invoice. And Bernard just looked at him. He was appalled, he says. This is not a good gift anymore. I thought that was a classic understatement. So Bernard asked the fellow, he says, have you already placed an order by mail? No, said the other. So how will you feel if one day you place an order and it comes like the box you just did? Will you be happy? No, I would not be happy. Then why are you doing it to others? The fellow thought a bit and he says, I'm a selfish person. By doing it like this, the unhappy customer will return the gift. Then we will always be called to work by the company. And he was very self-satisfied with that. Well, Bernard fell silent and just looked. However, he noticed a difference in his co-worker's work from that moment on. The man was treating the packages that he was now wrapping very carefully because something had occurred to him. This package someday might be coming to him. And he was wrapping each package as if it were. And so Bernard is watching all this, and then he realizes that the Holy Spirit had a lesson in this for him. He'd made an agreement with the company to do a certain job, wrapping gifts, for a certain amount of money. And Bernard's contract was with the Holy Spirit, with the law of life, to do it as well as he could. Because what other way could you do it if you've got a contract with the Holy Spirit? You would always want to do your best, at least I would. Another question came indirectly over a number of years from a woman whose grandchild had died, and this left her distraught. And so this woman's son came to one of the Ekis and said, do you have grief groups in Eckankar? And this Ekis said, no, but we do have ESAs. These are ex-spiritual aids. They simply listen to the problem of an individual. I guess pretty much the same as the confessor in the Catholic Church, except people are not expected to confess here. It's whenever they have any trouble whatsoever, just to simply air it. And then the ESA does nothing, just listens. And then if the Holy Spirit wants to change something in that person's life, it does so in its own way, at its own time. Well, after this ESA session, the woman felt much better, and years later she said, it saved my life, because it was the answer for her at that particular time. And so over the years, she and her son began to go to some of the EC worship services. In fact, they went quite regularly. And then lately, she joined a 4-week class. And the name of the class was Getting Answers from God Through Past Lives, Dreams, and Soul Travel. Now, the death of her grandchild had happened several years before, but she was still carrying the pain. And in all the time that she went to the worship services, to the EC worship services, she hadn't become a member of Eckankar because, frankly, she was wondering. She was waiting for the spiritual leader, myself, to drop the other shoe. She wondered, is this guy for real? I'm not, by the way, P.S. And she said, is this guy going to try to coerce people? Is he going to try to deceive them, make them members, something like this? No. No. Because then I carry your load for you. And if I like spiritual freedom, I won't carry the load of an unwilling person. And whenever you trick a person by clever words or some such into following your path, you take on part of that individual's burden. And I don't want to do that because I'm into spiritual freedom. So anyway, when she went to the 4-week class, Getting Answers from God Through Past Lives, Dreams, and Soul Travel, the people who were facilitating the class, they showed a video of a talk I'd given some time ago, The Right of Choice. In it was the story of an African father who lost his child in a hospital. And this story was the thing that finally released her from her grief. It gave her an understanding of the reason to the death of her own grandchild. It was through a back door, and it came years after the tragic event in her own life. But the Holy Spirit knows when you're ready to handle the information of why something happened. It may be a few days, it may be a moment, it may be a couple years, it may be many years. It may come very direct, and very often it comes in a way that is totally unexpected, as happened in this case. What's it all about? This part is the gift of change. I'd like to again read from the Shariat Ki Sugmat, Book 2, Chapter 1, which is, again, the eternal dreamer of Ak. When man cannot understand his problem or something which is unfamiliar to him, he is doubtful and asks questions. He must live by established traditions and forms. He must follow out a unified pattern of behavior and live with others who do likewise. Otherwise, his whole pattern of life is upset. If he's not living close to the source of the divine act, if he's not living close to this source, he might think in terms of not being able to do anything. This is because he is still living in the patterns and binds of society and not yet able to break through the boundaries of liberation. The Wall Street Journal yesterday, in the weekend journal section, which is special in its Friday edition, it had a very good article on religion called Redefining God. These people in churches today are in these forms of their religion as it was taught from their youth. But the people, the worshipers, are restless. They're looking around for something else. And so these ministers are doing what they can to fit the scriptures to these people, because every scriptures has something in it for everyone within that religious body. And so the article mentioned a Presbyterian church in New York. The minister started talking about God, and he said, "O burning mountain, O chosen sun, O perfect moon." And then, O fathomless well, O unattainable height, O clearness beyond measure. I know he was trying to reach the outer boundaries of everything within his mental realm that he could think of, to touch the farthest end of God possible. And so he went from the chosen sun down through the perfect moon, the unattainable height, and he went on down the burning mountain to the fathomless well, until the final phrase before it goes off into little dits, ellipses, is, "O clearness beyond measure." Well, I guess it's very clear to him. But I was sort of wondering whether I was up in the sky or whether I was in the well or where was God. But this is the nature of it. I'll get to that a little bit later. Everyone's understanding about God is different. In the same way that everyone's need and understanding of health is different. These two ministers and many others, and I'll mention the second minister in a minute, are trying to break out of the established traditions and forms of their religious societies. A minister in Evanston, Illinois, says tomorrow, Easter, he plans to compare God to a gardener in order to appease the growing theological diversity at his small Methodist church. He says, "I don't want anybody to feel left out." Now, these ministers are making a very honest and creative attempt to serve the spiritual needs of their congregations. And there's much of this going on. Several years ago, people were trying to decide whether or not God was a woman, a man, or just it. In Eck, of course, we say God is, and there isn't much else to be said about it. Sure, you can give a whole string of attributes that say God is this, God is that, God is not this, God is not that. The most we can say is that this being, God, we call it Sugmad sometimes, lives in the ocean of love and mercy, and its voice is the Holy Spirit. And this voice we call the Eck. That's all. It's no great mystery. but the gift of change. The gift of change. This is what brings spiritual unfoldment to us. It pulls us out of the routines of society and takes away everything familiar and puts us in a strange place. And we become afraid in a strange place. We're afraid of it. We fear it, certainly. Let's go back to that article from the Wall Street Journal, Redefining God. On the second page of the Weekend Journal, this article, Redefining God, continued, and there's a little table in there. The Weekend Journal interviewed a number of professional and religious leaders. One of the quotes was from a baseball player. He was an outfielder for the Texas Rangers, a Christian. He said, "God was my creator." He said in that way, "What is God? My creator." And another person, a minister for an American Baptist United Church of Christ congregation from New York. What is God? A force field of positive energy. Another one said, pure love, intense feelings of love. That was his understanding of God. This was a Jewish man, a CEO of a record company, and a novelist, a Catholic woman, said of God, "It may be a sexless being, but it's a being who cares very much about us as fleshly creatures." And another Christian preacher said, "What is God? I don't need to see him to believe him. I don't see heat, but I know it's hot." So what is the riddle of God? In Stranger by the River by Paul Twitchell, in the chapter by the same title, The Riddle of God, Rebbe Zartars says this: "The riddle of God is this: God is what ye believe it is. No man is wrong about the existence of God, and yet no man is right about his knowledge of God. There is no mystery in God except that it is what each soul believes that it is. So the riddle is that. But all men will quarrel and argue about the greatness of God and their own knowledge of Him." The riddle of God. Another evening I was listening to the John DeRemus show, the radio station with the easy music at night as I was winding down from a day's work. And he told the story of some clever village boys. They set a snare and they caught a game bird. Well, these guys were full of mischief, and they decided they were going to play a joke on the wise man of the village. They would take this bird, this game bird, to him, and they would hold him in front of the old wise man and say, "Is this bird living or dead?" They were going to trap him. They were going to catch him in a wrong answer. If the wise man said, "Why, the bird is living," the boys intended to prepare the bird for the pot, for the cooking pot right then and there. But if the wise man instead said, "Why, the bird is dead," they were going to take this live bird and throw it into the air and let it fly away. So they were very sure of themselves, and they came up to the village wise men, and they posed their question to him. They said, "Is this bird living or dead?" The wise man looked at them a long time, and then he looked at the bird. After a long silence, he said, "It is in your hands." And that's exactly how it is with your spiritual destiny. It's in your hands. What you do today, what you do tomorrow, what you've done in the past, everything added up makes you who and what you are today. And what you do today and tomorrow determines who you will be tomorrow. So in this talk, I've tried to give you an overview. The title was, "What's It All About?" in 3 sections. The riddle of the question, the gift of change, the riddle of God. Now, what is the answer to this "what's it all about" question? It's all about spiritual liberation. That means unfolding to the state of being a clear channel for divine love and service. Now that's all that it's about. And now in closing, I would like to say that I love you, and may the blessings be. Thank you very much.